All right guys, so we're back in the suite. This is gonna be the third shot in here. This time we're gonna be photographing the bathroom. And what I love about this bathroom is that it's actually, for a hotel, pretty architecturally interesting, which means I'm gonna try to get away with something more artistic than I would for a normal hotel shoot. Now obviously we don't have too many options when it comes to a good composition here. If I shot from where you're watching me right now, well, I get this solid white wall, but behind your camera, there's a beautiful view, there's a beautiful tub, there's a really cool shower installed. I really wanna capture that. Got really nice frosted glass and some really cool features going on over there. If I were to shoot this at an angle, it wouldn't work. Again, it's a long, skinny bathroom. I think a one-point perspective is definitely the way to go. If I were to come over here and shoot at an angle, well, I might get a little more depth to the cabinetry or something, but I'd be losing all of this really cool, interesting graphical quality about it, and I would be getting in the mirror almost the entirety of this wooden wall. So in the mirror, almost 1/3 of the frame, the mirror is enormous here, would be covered up by this completely dull, featureless wall. So rather than shoot at an angle and get a whole lot of nothing, I'm gonna do a one-point perspective, make sure I get the view, the tub, the sink, the cabinet, and at the same time have this really great graphical perspective. This is super narrow, and I'm not gonna be able to shoot a wide horizontal shot here. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go vertical. It's gonna allow me to capture some more of the features of this bathroom. It's gonna allow me to get all these towel racks and cabinets down here, this really cool countertop, the really high mirror, and again, the lighting up above. Also, it'll let me get the full floor-to-ceiling length of the shower behind the camera. So now usually I would be using an L bracket to go vertical here, but one of the cool things about this Arca Swiss Cube is you don't need an L bracket to go vertical. One of the problems that an L bracket presents on this camera with the new USB 3 is that the L bracket does not allow for a USB 3 connector to fit on the camera. With the old USB 2.0, you would have a 90-degree adapter so your USB would stay flush with the camera, but here I don't think I've seen any 90-degree USB 3 adapters yet. So I'm going to use the Cube to go vertical rather than an L bracket. So let's take a minute and walk through the composition. Now I could stand over here and go right down the center line, right down the edge of this countertop, but the problem would be that there would be no depth to the cabinets underneath the countertop. You wouldn't see any of the towels, any of the laundry bins, any of that really cool woodwork down there. So if I move over just a little bit, I can be sure that the camera is right in the middle of this alley, and I ensure that I do get some of this woodwork down here. So I've moved my camera over, and the problem that that creates is that I've got now a ton of this blank, featureless wooden wall. In order to combat that, I'm gonna leave the camera where it is, and I'm gonna use my tilt shift lens to keep the perspective the same so that straight ahead of the camera is the bathtub in the view, and that's still what the eye is gonna go to first, but I'm gonna shift the lens to the left, change my field of view, but keep the same perspective. And what that's gonna allow me to do is remove some of this giant featureless wall, keep the bathtub in the view, and show more of the vanity, the countertop, and the cabinets. So now that we have our composition locked in, let's take a minute and go over the staging. Just like the rooms that we shot before, since this is a hotel, everything has to be perfect. It's pretty self-explanatory, and there's not too much that can go wrong here, so I'm gonna just briefly touch on it. As you can see, there's a few things on the countertop. I strategically placed the soap to face the camera so that the labels are pointing into the camera so people know what they're looking at. I've used some of those soap bars and glasses to break up that big white expansive countertop. I've kind of tried to keep it simple. I don't want to go too crazy over the top, make it very visually busy because it is a very strong, simple one-point perspective. One thing I did do, I added a few towels down in the cabinet rack below, and I draped a towel over the shower bar, stuff like that. So again, keeping it simple, not getting crazy with it, and trying to keep the perspective and the composition the most important thing here. But again, since this is a hotel, you do want to take a minute, talk with your client, ask what they want, make sure the products they have are what they want to display on their website, and go from there. Alright, so let's take a moment and talk about the lighting. You might be looking at this and thinking, how the heck is he going to light this? That space is tiny. In the previous shots, as you can remember, we bounced lights to even out the exposure in the room so that I could then add my own light painted light on top of that. It's going to be a similar concept in here, but we're going to approach it differently. Since there's no way that we can fit lights in here to even out that exposure, I'm going to have to actually modify and alter the existing ambient light of this room to get it to the same place. So if you look at my initial test shot here, you'll see that the lighting is out of control. The dynamic range is all over the place, and I really want to compress that and make a more even light throughout. The first thing I notice is that in the shower, those open windows have got to be shut. So again, I'm going to slide those wooden doors shut and block out the light behind. After that, as we've had in all these other shots, there's a bit of a blue cast bouncing off the floor. So we're going to put a scrim out there, and we're going to hide some of that sun coming in and stop that blue reflection on the floor. The next thing I see is that these vanity lights are so hot, blown out, and out of control. I need to bring those down, but unfortunately there's no dimmer. We're gonna get a little bit old school here, and I'm actually gonna use some gels. They're neutral density gels, and just like a neutral density filter for your camera, it does the same thing for a light. So this here is a neutral density gel. This is about a 1 foot by 1 foot square. And as you can see, the lights that I want to fix are very skinny and very tall. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to actually cut this in half and kind of shape it to fit inside that light. And I'm just going to slip it down. It's going to knock down those lights by a couple stops. So now that we have our lights gel, let's take a shot and see how we look. Now, as you can see, none of these lights are way too blown out or way too dark. Everything is nice and even throughout the frame. So you may be wondering why I do this on location and spend 15 minutes getting it right here, rather than just quickly fixing it with a mask in Photoshop. The reason is pretty simple. Since without the gel, those lights are so bright that they tend to bloom, it would be a nightmare to fix this in Photoshop, kind of like the windows that I mentioned in the previous hotel shots. With that bloom, I wouldn't be able to just cleanly clean it up and brush in a lighter exposure. It's actually going to blow out and we're going to completely lose detail around those lights. So by bringing it down on location with the gel, we get a much cleaner file and it's going to be much easier to fix this in Photoshop. Alright, so now that we have everything set up, we've got our base exposure ready to go, it's time to start lighting. As usual, I'm going to use the ProPhoto B1 with a beauty dish and a half CTO gel on it to warm up that light. When I light this with my flash, the same concepts apply as if I were shooting a bedroom or a living room. I want the light to come towards the camera and I want to bring out the same texture and detail that I see in real life, but the camera might not pick up because it's too dark or being reflected upon. So that being said, I made sure to flash the countertop, the cabinet, the wood on the right-hand side of the frame of the mirror, and so on and so forth. So after I've used my beauty dish to go on and light the scene, I'm going to turn it off and I'm going to bracket using only the ambient existing light in the bathroom. Again, from very dark to very bright to capture the whole range. Now that we have the inside looking good, let's go ahead and capture our view for the outside. I'm going to use the same method that I've used 3 times now. This one is actually really simple because it's only one small window that we're lighting. I'm going to expose for the exterior, pop my flash, light up the interior, and that's going to give me a nice clean window frame that I can then drop in Photoshop. The very last step is one final bracketing sequence. I'm going to open up the window, leave all the lights on, and get that natural light to come in and wash over everything. So even though the general techniques of this photograph are the same as the last 3, there's definitely some little differences and nuances that make this shot different than the others. First, I significantly relied on the tilt-shift lens to get the perfect composition. Second, because I couldn't light this, I had to pay much more attention to the shaping of the light and create my own light from what I had rather than blasting it with flash to create that nice even base layer. Over time with more practice, you'll be able to enter a room like this and immediately know what to do. While on video, it might have taken us hours to get through each of these shots. In real life, once you get practice, you can get these done pretty quickly. I would say, without having to explain to the camera what I'm doing, I could bang a shot like this out in 15 or 20 minutes. All that being said, let's take our pieces and go into Photoshop. Okay guys, so let's get into our bathroom shot now. As you saw on location, the techniques here were slightly different. Some obvious, some not so obvious, but on the whole, I think this is a simpler shot than either of the wide shots in this room that we've done before. So we're here in Lightroom, and I'm just gonna I've already culled these. I just wanna do a brief edit and show you the shots that I've picked here. But by now you should know the process, you should know how I'm working, and there's not gonna be a whole lot of new information here. Most of the new stuff was on location, like I mentioned. So I'm just going to go through this very quickly. If you want to follow along or edit along with me, feel free. But with that being said, let's go ahead and get right into this edit here. So here are our 3 ambient light exposures. And as you can see, the light in this bathroom is pretty intense and it kind of fools the camera sensor. So I have a dark exposure and a lighter exposure, and then this is what the camera thought was like 2 stops overexposed, but obviously there's still a ton of shadow detail missing and some of the highlights are blown out. So before we go into Photoshop, I'm going to lift the shadows on that and kind of tame the highlights. And then what I really want to do is use my light painted frames here. You can see the difference in the highlights from my light painted frame. It's just a much better quality of light, a much more even tone across that entire countertop when compared with the ambient only frame. And again, same with down here. You get a really lovely quality of light. The texture of the wood comes out much better rather than in the ambient frames where it's just kind of this black hole down there. And then of course I did some light painting on the right hand side and then in the bathroom as well. So what we're going to do, we're going to take these and do some gentle shadow and highlight adjustments. I'm going to apply those across all these frames. So I'm going to sync, so Shift Command S or Shift Control S. I'm going to make sure all of my things are checked here. And if we go and look, we see, and go flip between the before and after, we get a nice little shadow boost and highlight reduction. And that's all I'm really going to do here in Lightroom, just like I said, a gentle edit. Now let's take these and go right into Photoshop and get started. So in Photoshop, let's go to File, Scripts, load files into Stack, and browse to this lesson folder. And this is 10 files. Go ahead and open those up and they should automatically stack for you. Okay, so now that we're in Photoshop, let's go ahead and turn off all of these layers until we get down to our base. And here's our ambient sort of overexposed shot. I'm not going to use that immediately. And here's our mid shot, which I will probably start to build off of. And here is our dark shot as well. Okay, so once we get down to the bottom, we can see our ambient only shots. This is the bright overexposed shot, which I think I'll probably end up using for the ceiling and to kind of blend together everything to make it feel more seamless. Here is the middle exposure shot, which still is a little bit too bright, but again, I might use that to blend everything together and make it feel like it's one natural picture. And lastly, we have our dark frame, and this is what I'm going to use to build everything on. So I'm going to use this darker frame because I really want those flash pops to be accentuated so that there's some mood in the photo, and so that the colors blend together better. With these brighter shots, there's a bit more bleed, some haloing around the lights and stuff, and if I want to keep this clean, I need to work on this sort of underexposed shot where there is no haloing or anything around these lights and everything looks nicely exposed. So even though it's really dark down here, I know I'm going to use my flash to bring that up. Same with this wood and same with all these darker areas. Using this dark ambient exposure for our base layer is really going to sort of add a nice, dark, moody spa feel to the entire image rather than something that's bright and overexposed. All right, so the first thing we're going to do is take care of our flash pop. So as you know, Alt-click, add a black layer mask. And I was too close to get this entire wall in one pop, so I'm going to blend this out of 3 different flash pops here. There again, Alt-click, black layer mask. Just using, as usual, a brush with 30% opacity. I'll try this in light and blend mode. That's better. And then lastly, this one up top. And group those together and call it right-hand wall. Add a mask, and I'm just going to tame this with a brush here, so it's not so bright over there. Just, I want to get that texture out of there. Let's see. All right, now let's start working on our vanity over here. So we have this light for the whole shelving area, which really starts to put some life into there. And I'm just going to clean this up. I don't want that to bleed onto the countertop at all. So really quickly, we'll get rid of all that on the top of that counter. And then let's see, I'm going to go to layer number 2 here. Alt-click, add a black layer mask. I'm going to leave that in normal blend mode and see how that looks. I might have to go just paint that whole thing in. In Lighten, you still get some of those countertop lights, which I think aren't the nicest. So I'm going to leave that, like I said, in the normal blend mode. I might even go underneath. There we go. If I put that underneath that shelving flash, everything blends together a bit nicer. I do like the effect that we get on the wall from that, so I'll bring some of that in over there. And let's see, lastly, I got to flash this bath here. So I'll turn that on, Alt click, and start painting in that bathtub there. So something like that should look pretty good. And now, of course, I don't want to forget this left-hand side with that light, so I'll paint in some of that as well. If I go too far, it looks a little trite, so I'm just going to blend some of that back out. Okay, I think that's looking pretty good for the interior. Now it's time to take care of the windows. This is the same exact technique that I used on the other interior shots, but this time, again, since we have that reflection in the glass pane here, I do need to make sure that I select around all of that. And just like before, using the pen tool, we'll go around the entirety of the window, being sure that we go over any of these objects inside here. All right, we've got our selection. Going to Command click or Control click to activate the path, turn it into a selection. Hit Shift F6 to feather it by 1 pixel. Again, to help it blend in a bit more realistically. I'm going to create a new group and I'm going to call it Windows. Drag our Windows layer into that group and apply that selection to a new mask on the windows there. And as you can see, we've perfectly replaced that window, but I do think I want to kind of brighten up this edge a bit. So what I'm going to do is make a selection around this glass pane right here. Same process, Control Enter, Command Enter, Shift F6. And I'm going to hit Command H to hide that so I can better see what I'm doing. And I'll just start to gently sort of paint in that brighter strip of glass so that things blend together a bit better. All right, and there are our windows. So now that we have our windows selection made, I'm going to go ahead and make it a little bit brighter out there. You can hit Command D to deselect any of our prior selections on that glass pane. And go to your new adjustment layer tools here and curves. And I'm just gonna, in that layer, gonna brighten that up a little bit to something like that, make it feel more natural. Okay, this is looking pretty good. So I'll go ahead and collapse that group, and I'm going to group all my flash layers together. Keep this document somewhat organized. And now I'm going to grab, let's start with this 09 layer here, this middle ambient, and I'm going to Alt click to add a layer mask filled with black. And I'm going to start painting in some of that brighter layer on the ceiling. down in here. Again, I want to make this feel somewhere between very natural and, like I said, that moody spa sort of feeling. And if you have any trouble with your light painted layers, you can use these ambient layers to blend everything together and cover your tracks a bit better. I think we could use some down in here on this door. All right, and I don't know if we need to go brighter. I don't really think we do. So we might not end up using this last layer here. That's okay. And everything's looking pretty good. I think it's time to clean this up. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a new frequency separation layer. Again, Command-Alt-Shift-E. I'm going to do that twice on top of everything to get a new layer 1 and layer 2. I'm going to name the bottom layer color and the top layer texture. And I'm going to blur this color layer, so filter, blur, Gaussian blur, to anywhere between 12 and 20 pixels. I've arbitrarily chosen 17.6. Hit enter, and on the texture layer we can turn that on and go to image, apply image, and again, these are the settings you're going to want, and you're going to want to apply that to your color layer. So you get this high pass filter looking image, and click OK. So again, match up your settings to this. OK. Change the blend mode on our texture layer to linear light, and we're in business. I'm going to go ahead and group these together and call it frequency separation. There's all sorts of actions that you can download that will do this for you, but just so you get the hang of it, I'm going to be doing it manually throughout the tutorial so that I bang it into your head. And we're going to go in here and clone out any of our little problem spots. So for example, this big giant scratch in the mirror. Same thing over here. And these are all on the color layer with your clone sample set to current layer if you have any trouble with this. And again, I have that fuzzy spot there, so I'll go to my color layer and do the same thing, just sample some of those colors, and we'll perfectly paint away that weirdness. You can still use all your favorite lassos and pens and everything on this frequency separation layer to keep everything natural and confined to where you want it. I'll let you guys frequency separate to your heart's content, but I want to get to the end of this here. So there's one last thing that I want to do, and that is kind of fix the color of the ceiling, tone that down to a more consistent white. So as I've done before, I'm going to grab a hue and saturation adjustment layer, going to make a quick selection using the pen tool all around the ceiling. Being sure to avoid some of that green glass and the wood. But also being sure that I get everything in the mirror here. Go ahead and hit Command Enter to activate that selection. Shift F6 to feather it by one edge. And once we have that mask activated, we can apply it to the hue and saturation layer and activate our hue and saturation properties here. Grab our hand tool and we can pull down the reds. And it looks like there's some yellow in there as well, so I'm going to shift that a bit to the right. And that feels a little fake to me. So like somewhere in there, just to kind of clean this up a bit, make it feel not so reddish, but while still retaining some warmth in the interior. All right. And now on the whole, I would say that is pretty much done. If anything, you might want to brighten it up just a little bit with curves or something. And then you can paint that out of the corners for a little bit of a vignette to kind of bring the eye through, help focus your eye. But I would say that is going to be our finished shot. So I'm going to go Command-Alt-Shift-E, flatten all to a new layer, drag out my ruler lines, make sure everything is nicely vertical and horizontal, and skew so that we're all lined up and nothing feels like it's falling over or leaning one way or another. All right, once that looks good, go ahead, hit Enter, and go ahead and save that file. And as usual, I may do a couple extra adjustments in Lightroom just to finish this really quick, but on the whole, I think that is looking really good. We got a nice moody bathroom shot with no out-of-control lighting. We used our location techniques and post to bring this together. A pretty simple shot as far as the post goes, but some different techniques on location. So that wraps up shooting the actual hotel rooms. Now, we're going to go on and shoot some exteriors and some other spaces in the hotel as well. So let's go back on location and get to work.